So good looking Final Four, except for the lack of Syracuse in it. That is for sure. All right, so with that, we will bring on now the CEO of Inside Lacrosse. He is Terry Foy. All right, Terry, have we figured out what the word back means yet? I don't know what dictionary we need to use. What's your definition here of back as we're talking the lax blue bloods here at this point?
Yeah, the short answer is no. We haven't figured out the definition of back yet because depending on who you talk to, it means two very different things. But I think ultimately what it means is, what is the standard you aspire to? What do you think it means, Brian?
I think we've determined, and you used the quote from Gary in your article today, and I just played back that little bit from his press conference yesterday. I guess, if Syracuse is not in the Final Four, I guess they're not quite back, right? Like, I guess you kind of got to be on the biggest stage of the sport to be all the way back, I'd imagine.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that when you're the program that has the most Final Four appearances and has 11 national championships, then it justifies having the highest of standards. But I also think that there's a portion of this conversation that really should focus on the incremental, right, and the improvement and the progress. And I think that's what for me is going to be the legacy of this 24 season and team when it comes to Syracuse. I think and not to take a victory lap, but in the preseason article that I wrote, and I think you and I spoke about it around that time as well, the quarterfinals were the threshold, right? So, to an extent, it can't be viewed as a disappointment, in my opinion. I don't see it as expectations exceeded or expectations fallen short of. I think expectations were met, and now it's just a question of what does it mean for 25 and beyond.
Yeah, I think that's what's crazy about it, Terry, is we got Terry Foy from Inside Lacrosse with us. If we go back to January, the Orange met all those expectations. I think they got exactly where a lot of us thought they would. But then when you get to this game and you're the favorite team, it's like, oh, man, you're one step away, and it got away from you. So I guess, a part of the back thing is having a foundation for a strong future of the program as well. How well do you think the foundation has been built here for Syracuse 25, 26, et cetera, going forward?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue that it's been built in any way other than very well, both through the context of recruiting, player development, schematic development, and what they've been able to do in the transfer portal. So, at this point, obviously, transfer portal activity will wind down over the course of the foreseeable future. We have, I believe, 22 graduate transfers from the Ivy League in the portal. We've reported more than a half dozen and maybe even a dozen of them having chosen their destinations. Not all of them are going to play. And so far, Syracuse hasn't landed one of them. They haven't gotten the equivalent of Jake Stevens or Sammy English for the 25 season yet. That being said, the landscape of college lacrosse is going to change, and this Syracuse roster is going to be a little bit of an outlier with respect to how old it is and how experienced it is. With so many sophomores having started each of the last two seasons, even though they're only juniors, they're still going to be more veteran than the majority of the teams they play, and that certainly is true within their own conference with respect to the likes of Duke, Virginia, and then certainly some of their rivals like Johns Hopkins.
Yeah. You look at a lot of the superstars in this league are going to be, at long last, graduating. Connor Schellenberger, who made the great play yesterday, certainly among the list as we got Terry Foy with us. Let's talk about this game yesterday, Terry. It's 10-8, and it just felt to me watching the game like Denver just would not let Syracuse go. Like they would not let him step on the gas at any point. Was that the feel of you watching it, that Denver was able to just manipulate the pace of that game to their liking over the full 60 minutes?
Yeah, I think that was one of the most interesting conversations to have throughout the course of the game. And the way I frame it is that certainly the way the first half unfolded was to Denver's liking. And I asked Mac Brown about it post-game, was there a version of the game that you wanted to avoid? And he said, we didn't want to get into a track meet. But what's interesting is that when I think about Syracuse over the course of this season, I don't think of them as a track meet team. I think of them as an explosive team, a team. Yeah. The analogy that I use is it feels like a dam breaks, right? It's not as if they were the fastest paced team in college lacrosse. And certainly even though they were capable of scoring in transition, it was really the moments like what we saw in the third quarter against Towson that kind of, in my estimation, that was the threat if you were Denver, right? The threat of losing a 10-4 game like one of Syracuse's signature wins in late March against Syracuse in the Dome, like that was available, right? That was a possibility, but you kind of knew by the end of the first half that wasn't going to be the case anymore. So really the threat that was posed was if the dam is going to break, when is it going to happen? And, for Syracuse, what's interesting is that if that's your approach, I feel like it doesn't really matter what form the totality of the game takes. What matters is that you position yourself in order to break the dam in an active way. And, I think ultimately when you're kind of deciding credit and assigning blame or whatever the case may be, that functional credit goes to Denver for putting themselves in a position where they never allowed the dam to break. And I thought it was most impressive after Syracuse cut it to 10-8 with whatever it was, 3-4 minutes left. And they had a number of possessions, and Joey Spallina hit a crossbar and Jake Stevens put a shot just over the crossbar. And you can say that was luck that went against the Orange and in the Pioneers' favor. But on the other hand, you look at it and say, if Denver won 10-8, and they clearly were comfortable with the game unfolding in the way that it did over the course of the fourth quarter after they had the third quarter spurt. It was kind of funny to contrast it against the Hawkins-Virginia game where, Hawkins was leading 10-7 and Virginia scored 3 goals in the fourth quarter. That meant the game was tied. Whereas because Denver was up 10-5 at the end of the third quarter when the Orange only scored 3 in the fourth, they were only able to cut it to 2. So, I looked at it and said it wasn't as if Denver obviously dictated the pace, and they won that from a game plan standpoint. But I'm not sure what the ideal version of the game from a full game plan standpoint would have looked like for Syracuse. I think it was that they never got that 5 to 7 minute rush where they were able to score 3, 4, 5 goals and totally change the tenor and tempo of the game.
Yeah, they had the one, early fourth quarter. They had the 2 goals back to back, but it then took a while to tack on the third, and never got to the fourth. Where Towson last week was like, oh my goodness, what just happened? And the game was over almost instantly after halftime. Literally at one point when we didn't know what the score was because there was a weird ruling, and the score just kept tallying up in that game. As we got Terry Foy from Inside Lacrosse with us, you look at Syracuse, and obviously because of the number, because of the recruiting ranking, because of all of it, a lot of the eyes go to Joey Spallina, and he's held just to one shot yesterday. What do you make of Spallina's performance? What Denver did to him defensively, and where he's at halfway through his college career?
Sure. Well, I think you can parse it any number of ways. And, I will sound like a defender or an apologist by making this point. But I think if you look back at the clips of the game, Joey had 2 assists to the crease that were wide open, and the finishers hit Malcolm Cleveland in the chest. And, yeah, I mean, it's not to say that a 2-assist, 0 for 1 or 0 for 2 shooting performance with 3 turnovers is a good game, but certainly it's better than it was. And you can obviously go through and have those types of adjudications for pretty much every player on the field. So that's not that's not the argument I'm trying to make. I thought that there was something about Denver's game plan that was equivalent to Maryland's game plan in guarding Brennan O'Neill on Saturday, where I think if you'd asked folks during the week, who would you have expected to see guard Brennan O'Neill, it would have been Ajax Zapatello. Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, they put Zapatello on Josh Zawada because he's kind of the hinge man for them, the ball mover. They put Colin Burles on Brennan O'Neill. They turned him into an initiator, and then they sent a slide or a half slide at him really fast, and that turned him into a feeder, made him uncomfortable. And you saw the effects that had on Duke. I thought it was interesting. You look at number 15, Jimmy Freehill for Denver. He had been guarding a lot of opponents' number 1 attackmen, and particularly coming off of the job that he did guarding Mike Boehm the week prior, you probably would have assumed that he was going to get the Spallina assignment. But it's very clear to me that Denver staff looks at Joey more as a strength and power dodger than they do a speed and quickness dodger, and that was why they thought Jack DiBenedetto was going to be the best guy guarding him. And I didn't think that there was much in the way of junk that they threw at Syracuse. I thought that the way they played some of the picks behind and the way in which they handled some of the hang-ups were a little bit interesting, but ultimately they played him pretty well straight up, and that's kind of the way the game unfolded. Where Joey Spallina is at with respect to, this stage of his career is he just has to get better, right? And he knows it. He knows it as well and better than anybody. He's a great player. He is a top 12 attackman unequivocally in college lacrosse, in my opinion. But there is a gap between where he is right now and where the players with whom he wants to be considered right alongside are. And again, that's why, some guys lifeguard or intern at, Morgan Stanley in the summer, and Joey's going to go play box lacrosse in Canada because it's really important to him to get better, and this is the best pathway that he knows how to do it. Everyone's going to focus on the difference in his statistical production against, one type of opponent, right, outside of the top 15, top 20 from a strength of schedule or a strength of opponent defense standpoint, versus when he's being guarded playing against the best teams in the country, and that's the next step for him. I feel like it's pretty natural, right, and I always feel like I'm defending myself when I say, when we talked about him as a number one recruit, the primary argument was the height of his floor because of how much he had played against older and highest quality competition, because of how seriously he was going to take it from a physical fitness and from an academic standpoint. There was so little risk associated with Joey Spallina. But you could also look at him and identify those athletic deficits that were going to potentially hamper his ability to be, the number one offensive player when he's, going up against some of the opponents that Syracuse plays. And so far it's manifested that way. And so now, I don't think he's going to get taller. I don't think he's going to get demonstrably heavier or faster or quicker. He's going to have to get smarter, and he's an incredibly smart player. And so now the next step is just figuring out how to take advantage of, the likes of Kenny Brower, whomever else is guarding him. And he's going to have to win those physical mismatches. Yeah,
will be very interesting to watch his development going into junior and senior year. And go figure. We say all that, like if we take his career stats right now, multiply him by 2, he's Syracuse's all-time leading scorer if it does come to that in a couple of years. So that is the microscope that this guy operates under as the former number one recruit in the country. But we got Terry Foy with us. So, Terry, Final Four is set. It's Notre Dame, Denver, and it's Maryland and Virginia. So 3 lower-seeded teams out of the top 4 getting through to the Final Four. Notre Dame's the clear favorite. Out of the other 3, who is best set here, Terry, to be the team that can beat Notre Dame this weekend?
Well, it's funny because I didn't think that was the question that you were going to ask. I thought you were going to ask who's the next most likely team to win a national championship. I think the team that's actually best suited right now to beat Notre Dame is Denver.
Okay.
For a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the lack of familiarity. But certainly some of the things that worked against Syracuse are liable to work in some way and in some proxy against Notre Dame for a variety of reasons and in a variety of ways. And I have a couple people that know this game really well, and I was texting with them late last night, and they made that comment. It was not an original thought from me, but it gave me the juice I needed in order to get excited about this weekend. And when you add some of the emotion to it, given, some of the rivalry aspects of this series and some of the historical aspects of the series. And that was one of the things that I really took away from spending time with Denver after the game yesterday, is that they conjured up a lot of emotion, a lot of ill will towards Syracuse. And I think it really helped motivate them. Now, if the question is, who's the second most likely team to win a national championship? Say, for instance, Denver is able to knock off the kind of, forgive the analogy, but the 1980 Soviets in the semifinals. Are they going to have enough gas in the tank to win on Monday, especially if they play a Virginia team who, took care of business against Maryland in the regular season meeting? You can imagine a scenario in which Maryland is in a similar situation, right? They just beat a Duke team against which they were heavy underdogs. Maybe they don't come out with the same verve and fire. And then all of a sudden you're going to ask Denver to clear against a 10-man ride that just pushed Johns Hopkins into his worst clearing game of the season. I don't know. That's a tall order. So I'm going to sit and say that if Notre Dame makes it to Monday, they're going to be a tough team to beat for vibes and confidence alone. But if they get upset by Denver on Saturday, I can imagine a scenario in which the Pioneers have a tough time turning around and winning 40 hours later.
All right, so in this, to complete the analogy, I guess this makes Virginia Finland going back to 1980. This whole thing, but how shocked would you be to see Notre Dame get beaten? I just think they are. I get it. Like, you get a 1-goal game in this tournament and you don't know what the hell's going to go on. It just feels to me, Terry, that Notre Dame is head and shoulders above everybody else right now.
Yeah, for me, it's the redundancy and the depth, right? And that's the part that makes you wonder, especially when we have a blueprint for how they've been beaten, right? And it was Georgetown earlier in the regular season. But it does raise questions as to how replicatable is it? What did they learn from that they are now guarded against? And how much creativity is it going to require from the opponent to come up with a game plan that can beat them? And then the combination of discipline and courage in order to be able to see that out over the course of a 60 or 60-plus minute game. And so, yeah, I mean, the simple fact is that they don't have any weaknesses, right? There are parts of their outfit, roster, approach, tactics, whatever you want to say, that are stronger than others. But at the same time, Johns Hopkins, one of their big strengths was their midfield depth. Notre Dame's midfield is deeper than Johns Hopkins' midfield, and Johns Hopkins does not have a finisher like Jake Taylor or a quarterback like Pat Cavanaugh or a third attackman like Chris Cavanaugh. So the simple fact is that this is a Notre Dame team that doesn't have any weaknesses. If they lose, it will be a story as to how and why that I don't have the ability to forecast. We're going to have to write that one in real time. They come in as a super heavy favorite, no question about it.
Yeah, honestly, I think the biggest hurdle they had was last year, in that they had never won it before. Now that they've gotten that out of the way, I don't know what hurdle they got left here this year. They've just looked fantastic. Before I let you go, Terry, this Maryland team, I mean, as far as Maryland teams go anyway, like a couple weeks ago, looked like just a mess, at least to their recent history. What does this tell you about what John Tillman was able to do there to take, like this of all Maryland teams, and get them back to the Final Four?
What does it tell you about Maryland, or what does it tell you about John Tillman? Because
I'm giving a lot to John Tillman here for getting them through this, because like the guy don't miss in the first couple weeks of these tournaments.
No question. And I think that, it is interesting, too, because keep in mind, they lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament last year, right? So It's not a fait accompli. It's not something that, can't be it has to be earned is what it comes down to. And I've already said a few of the things that stand out or impress me the most, but it really is the creativity in the game plan, right, in terms of specifically defensive game plan, to lean into their strengths, Logan McNaney in goal and Luke Weirman at the faceoff X, and then kind of similarly, the defensive game plan in terms of the approach of guarding Brennan O'Neill, and then obviously the opportunistic scoring at the offensive end was just remarkable. And really, what it came down to, in my opinion, it becomes hard to parse out how much credit to give the offensive performance versus the defensive performance versus the way in which they manage game flow. And really, when you get to that level of, kind of detail hunting, then obviously the coaching staff deserves a tremendous amount of credit, because they're the ones that actually monitor and maintain all those details. So, just a really nice job by John Tillman and his staff in terms of putting it all together.
All right, lastly, before I let you go here, Terry, Syracuse preseason what next year? How high do you think they're going to land when we wake up in December or January of next year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, they're going to be roughly in the same tier as they were this year, right? That probably 4 to 7 range. I think that some of the teams that were ahead of them, like Duke, Virginia, Notre Dame, they're going to have bigger questions, but at the same time, they're also going to, have some known answers. So, and if it's not them, it would be some of the other teams that were just a notch behind them that, kind of project to pass them in the offseason, whether that be somebody like Cornell or Yale or whomever. So, but ultimately what it comes down to is that, this is a Syracuse team that has established themselves back as an NCAA tournament contender. They've won a game, which is what you should expect this program to do. And now they know what the next hump is that they've got to get over. I think going into next season, they're going to be right on that threshold. I mean, ultimately they were there this year in the sense that they were favored, like you said. But now this next step becomes actually winning when you're favored. And that'll be the expectation heading into next year.
Yeah, we're going to have to hopefully get around to actually remembering where the Final Four is around these parts, which is shocking to say. I honestly wasn't certain it was in Philly until a couple weeks ago, and that is, that's a sad state of affairs around here when we're talking Lex. But I'm sure you'll enjoy.
Well, had it been 26, you would have had an excuse, because I don't think anybody knows where the 26th Final Four is, because it has to move because of the World Cup. So we're all still we're learning as we go.
Okay, well hopefully where's is next year's Foxborough? Where's next year's, Terry? Is it my
25? 26 was Foxborough, and that's why they're one of the hosts for 25. I honestly don't know. It's either in Philly or Foxborough. I know that it's only in one of those two locations.
All right, that's usually a safe bet. So one of the two. They're easy drives from here. Hopefully Syracuse will end up in one or the other. All right, Terry, always great to chat. Enjoy championship weekend. I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
There he goes, Terry Foy, the CEO of Inside Lacrosse. Do check out InsideLacrosse.com all week long. It's your place to be. Terry had a nice article this morning on the fact of, is Syracuse back? A question that has been posed many times ad nauseum, including by Terry at the beginning of the season, as we discussed months ago. Close? Not quite, seems to be our answer at the moment. All right, let's hit a break in this hour, brought to you by William Matar. When we come back, phone lines open. 315-437-7644 for ESPN 44. Our guest next hour, I can tell you this, she'll be in the Final Four. She won't be back in the Final Four. because she's a freshman. Her teammates will be back in the Final Four because they were there last year. Casey Benoit of the Syracuse women's lacrosse team, one of their young starting defenders. But she's really good. Like, really, really good. Like, can guard the best players in the country good. She'll join us next hour. We're back after this. QSportsTalk.com, ESPN Radio.